The Exalted Abyssals campaign we discuss this episode is live November 14th through December 14th on Indiegogo. We accidentally said Kickstarter a few times in this ep, but it's definitely Indiegogo, so just check the link in the show notes. All right, this is Dark Days Radio. I'm one of your hosts, Mike, and tonight I'm joined by Chigg. How's it going, Chigg?
Pretty good, Mike. How's things up there in the frozen north?
It was really chilly today. I was out doing an inspection. My hands are kind of freezing, but I made it through. And speaking of the chilly north, we have a fellow Northman here with us today. We have Chazz Kellner, all-star podcaster and writer, here to talk to us about some very cool stuff. How's it going, Chazz?
I'm doing well, thanks. I always find it kind of funny when people talk about Massachusetts being cold. As being from Vermont, moving to Massachusetts makes me wonder where the winter went.
Oh man, you're a Vermonter? I didn't even know that. That's exciting. Oh gosh, we'll have to talk about that when we go over your street cred a little bit. Exciting, yeah. Actually, Chazz, I just saw the Frozen play in Boston, like the Disney Frozen movie. And it kind of made me sad because I kind of miss the winter. We don't really have it anymore.
Yeah, I moved back to the U.S. and to Massachusetts in 2015 when we had that pretty epic snow winter.
Yeah. Yep.
And it has not come close to that since.
And Chigg, how do you feel about snow?
Here in Texas, we don't trust snow, so
I believe it. All right, so this episode today, we're going to be talking about Exalted Abyssals, which has an upcoming Kickstarter, which Chazz will be getting into later. But before we get to the main part of the episode, let's have a few updates. Let's start off with a game update. Chazz, what have you been doing lately for gaming?
Well, a lot of my gaming time got eaten up by having a baby, but I have been easing back into it. So the game that I've been playing the most of recently is Root the RPG, which is a powered by the Apocalypse game of it's described as cute woodland creatures meets Game of Thrones, which is a great description. You play a group of vagabonds traveling the wilderness and kind of stuck between the factions that are vying for control of the woodland.
Yeah, that's really exciting. That's from Magpie Games, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. It's good to hear. And Chigg, what have you been playing lately?
We just wrapped up a Marvel superheroes game, and my group is starting character creation on the Old Gods of Appalachia role-playing game next.
Ooh, that's gonna be pretty spicy. You're gonna have to come back on the show and talk about that a little bit.
It's the Cypher system, so it already has at least 2 strikes against it in my book, but I'm willing to give it a chance because I like the source material.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, we'll definitely talk about it at some point in the future. Yeah, that'll be pretty cool. And with that gaming update, let's move on to gaming news a little bit. All right, so there's been a lot going on for gaming news, and I think the number one first thing we want to talk about is the either upcoming or already ongoing Exalted Abyssals Kickstarter, depending on when this goes out. So, Chazz, do you want to mention a few highlights about that, and also maybe include the date when it goes live?
I can't give you the exact date. I know as of right now we are targeting the week of November 13th. But that is pending all the final approval gates that it needs to move through. But yeah, we have the Abyssals Kickstarter for Exalted 3rd Edition coming very soon, and we'll talk a whole bunch about that. It is the 6th big book for Exalted 3rd Edition, and an update to one of my favorites from the past of Exalted.
Yeah, it's definitely it's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be really exciting. We'll get more into the Abyssals later. I think this is a big deal because we haven't had an Abyssal or sorry an Exalted Kickstarter in quite some time, have we? It's been like it's been a year or two, right?
We actually had the last one last year around this time. We had the campaign for Sidereals, and last year was a good year for Exalted because we had both the Exigence and Sidereals Kickstarter campaigns in 2022. So it has been about a year, but I feel like we're getting a good cadence back into the Exalted development pipeline. So.
Also, in gaming news, Onyx Path has been putting out a lot of stuff for their cool new setting, The World Below. It's a pretty neat one. It's in some ways similar, I feel, to Earth Dawn, except what if everyone was just still stuck underground and the terrors of the deep, the terrors of the evil magical world were still kind of getting at them through the dark tunnels of that underworld of caverns. So it's a pretty neat fantasy setting, and pretty excited to see more stuff come out for that. And then finally, for really big news, this one came out of left field. Didn't see it coming. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the RPG, is back. Chigg, what do you think about that?
I'm in because I have to complete my collection of After the Bomb books. So, yeah, the Kickstarter is currently ongoing. I will almost assuredly never play this game, but because I'm a completionist, I have to own it. So.
Yeah, it's the Kickstarter is for a slight revision to the book that came out in 1984, I think. Really, no major mechanical changes.
They have to remove some of the questionable content, but yeah, it's still using the exact same system that every Palladium book has used since Palladium published a book. No changes, no notes. There's no trash can in that editorial office. So, if you've ever played Palladium and you like Ninja Turtles, check it out.
Why would you improve on perfection?
If it was good enough for everybody in 1982, then it's good enough for you in 2023.
That is the logic. And with that, let's move on over to our main segment, which is on. But you know what? Before we get on to talking about the Abyssals, let's talk to Chazz a little bit, right?
Yeah, we like to establish nerd cred around here, so we got to check your card, Chazz. Nothing personal. How did you get started with gaming?
So I got started when I was about 10 years old. My dad owns a company, and I used to do like odd jobs for extra money in the summer at his company. And one of the guys who worked in the warehouse was a role-playing guy, and so he told me about his D&D campaign and about his West End Star Wars game. And that was how I originally got introduced to RPGs. I ended up with the West End Star Wars 2nd edition book as my first RPG book because I was already a big Star Wars nerd, and kind of consumed that and never got to play it because I was a 10-year-old and did not have any other people around me of that age or persuasion for RPGs, but became an avid collector of RPG books even very early on. My brothers were both younger than me and did not have the attention span at that age to learn RPG rules or roll dice or make a character sheet. And so I kind of introduced them to freeform role-playing. So that freeform narrative role-playing was kind of the only way that I did role-playing for like the first 3 or 4 years of being a role player, and then I slowly got a handful of games of like D&D 3rd edition when that came out when I was in high school, but didn't really get to take off with active role playing until I was towards the end of high school and joined the Vampire LARP community up in Burlington and discovered World of Darkness games. Changeling the Dreaming was a favorite of mine at the time, and actually Exalted, which I had kind of been running on and off ever since then.
Ooh, wow.
Valid start. If you're 10 years old and you have younger siblings, you can definitely teach them how to play the West End games, Star Wars game. That's super simple, right? A 6-year-old can pick that up just instinctively, right?
Yeah, no, I didn't try with the Star Wars thing. They were not as into Star Wars as I was. I went for a more generic fantasy, and I also had no idea what I was doing because I didn't have anyone teaching me. I was trying to figure all of it out from the book. So I know it's one of those truisms in the RPG community that you kind of need someone to introduce you to how playing works. And I'm one of those people who didn't have that introduction.
We are all 6 degrees away from Gary Gygax. So like I said, that's a great start. What are you up to these days?
These days, most of my focus is on writing and developing for Exalted. I am a podcaster at large in that I have been involved in a whole bunch of shows over time. I think most notably, Exalted fans will know me from either the Fall of Giara on the Story Told podcast, or from the Systematic Understanding of Everything, which is the Exalted Explainer podcast. So they're my two big shows. But then I have two other shows that I was involved in. Opcast, which is the Trinity Continuum podcast. I helped get that off the ground, and that is still running. I am now just a listener for that show, and I'm pleased to see that continuing, as well as Pain in the Dice, which is the periodic show that Terry and I release when we want to sit down and talk about something in gaming.
Big,
Go ahead.
gonna say I'm a big fan of Pain in the Dice, and I enjoyed Systematic Understanding of Everything. Although at the end of it, I do not feel I understood everything, so I'm gonna need to ask for my subscription fee back. It was free. Okay, so thank you.
We will refund 100% of the money that you spent on that show.
That's all I ask. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I got to say, Chaz, after playing Exalted Third Edition with you a couple years back, I binged Systematic Understanding of Everything. It was a good time, definitely.
Nice. We wanted to make a show that was bingeable, that had an end point, because I don't think any of us were ready to jump into the actual Explain Everything in Exalted show, because we all had other projects we were doing at the time. So we laid out a list of topics that we wanted to cover, and over the course of the show, we doubled it. But it still kind of fell into a neat 30-plus episode arc of covering the high points for Exalted, with us occasionally coming back to talk about stuff. So if you really need more Exalted content, do stay subscribed to the Systematic Understanding of Everything. I am also about to ramp up recording a new Exalted AP. This was supposed to happen like a year and a half ago, and when one of the players got very, very sick for an extended period, and then I was having a baby, so that got put on hold until now, and we actually have our first recording on the calendar. Knock on wood for that, because we've had that a few times now. But like I said, more of my time is taken up by writing. I'm a writer and developer for the Onyx Path, mainly for Exalted, but I've written for Chronicles of Darkness and Trinity as well. And I mentioned Root earlier. I have actually done some writing for Magpie on Root too. But Exalted is my passion in terms of game writing, and with the limited time that I have available these days, that does take up most of it.
Yeah, that's really epic and good to hear. I'm just kind of curious, Chaz, is this new Exalted actual play going to be using the Exalted 3rd Edition rules, or do you think it's going to be using the Exalted Essence rules?
It is going to be Exalted 3rd Edition.
All right. Very cool, very cool. So we're getting the full mechanics with that one. All right. So listeners of Darker Days that have been around for a long time know that we have never done an Exalted episode. We've mentioned it, we've teased about it, but we've never actually done an episode which explained what Exalted is and really got into the setting. So I felt like before talking about Exalted Abyssals, we should kind of dig in and give just a real broad but also a little bit dense overview of what the Exalted setting is. So Exalted was White Wolf's epic non-Western fantasy role-playing game, originally released in 2001. When it first came out, it was really compared to being an anime role-playing game, but as the editions and time progressed, it became more focused on being non-Western. The art styles changed a little bit, and it has kind of become a very interesting and really eclectic game today. It was continuously published since 2001, and currently now it's in its third edition, but also has the new Rules Light Exalted Essence version that just came out recently. Exalted takes place in creation, which is essentially this flat world anchored by 5 elements: air, earth, fire, water, and wood. We look at the map of creation, it's very interesting because off in the west, per the celestial compass direction, it's close to that kind of node of water. So there's only a few islands and these giant expansive seas. However, in the east, it's more focused on woods. There's trees. In the middle, that's where the earth node is, and there's a grand spire on this single island. So it's a very interesting and unique take on world building. Creation was originally controlled by these primordials, these kind of ancient titans who grew delinquent, playing their games of divinity. The primordials were overthrown by the gods, and their super-power-infused mortal followers, known as the Exalted. Exalted centers on the solar exalts who ran creation for the gods until, of course, they were overthrown themselves by the lesser dragon-blooded. The solar exalts and their souls were trapped in a jade prison for centuries as creation fell into shambles, until they were mysteriously set free. The mystery of the solar exalted is further compounded when some souls return, empowered not by the eternal sun, but twisted by dark entities. So in Exalted, characters are these powerful beings, essentially demigods, with the freedom to drastically impact the world at large. Will they serve the status quo or fight to restore creation to its past glory from times before? Will characters retreat from society to found their own little independent realms that they can control, or are they going to try to conquer what was theirs centuries ago? Will the Exalted seek out the gods, who are now addicted to the games of divinity like the primordials before them, or they forsake these gods who originally gave them power? So it's a cool setting. There's a lot going on with it, and much like the World of Darkness games, which were sort of related to Exalted, but kind of not, it's very, very deep in its lore and its creation of not just setting, and world building, but also kind of the metaphysics of everything that's going on, which is, I know, something that people love about the World of Darkness and the Chronicles of Darkness games. Chigg, you've experienced Exalted a little bit back in the day. What really drew you to it, or made you excited about the setting?
When it was being teased and announced, it was advertised as the prehistory of the World of Darkness, and that was dropped fairly quickly because they didn't want to tie everything together. It was just a lot of effort, and it would tie their hands. I get it. Mm-hmm. But I was really excited about that, because I was a big lore nerd, and I always have been. So I was really looking forward to seeing, what happened to all the other vampire lords, what happened to all the, how did these guys turn into mages eventually? But, they kind of dropped all that. So still, it's a really cool setting.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting for some of those links. I think we talked about this when we were discussing Kindred of the East, but a lot of the ideas for how kind of, I don't remember the exact term for it, dragon lines, I believe, how that metaphysics works was actually directly ported into Exalted later. And we'll talk about this with the Abyssals, but a lot of ideas were cribbed from Wraith the Oblivion, at least for the first edition of Abyssals itself. Chazz, you've obviously dedicated so much time to this setting. Is there anything in general that you'd like to share about it that really gets your creative juices flowing or really just excites you about it?
Yeah, the thing that gets me really excited to play and run Exalted is that one of the central questions that you kind of answer with your character is, what are you going to do with the power that you have? as one of the Exalted, these demigod-like heroes, you have the power to change the world around you. And I think this was one of the things that made it really when I was getting into it at the beginning, a step away from the world of darkness, is that you could be the big movers and shakers very early in the course of a game, and that was really cool. And so as my storytelling around the game has evolved, I really try to give player characters a lot of that drive to let them change the world and the setting that they're in. And that's a big part of what the game wants you to be doing, is to say, you've got all this power, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah, and I think that's also a good point, because unlike the World of Darkness, your power level is so much higher. So you need to, if you're running it from that World of Darkness, Chronicles of Darkness background, really adjust your expectations and kind of explain the expectations to the players. I do remember running an Exalted game for 2nd edition, wherein the players felt like they were still supposed to be very weak, but as it turns out, they were actually in that. The big mystery of my chronicle was that they were the only Solar Exalted in the entire setting, and it was why that occurred. Why were they the only ones there at that point? So they really were basically the most powerful people around that could actively influence creation. So
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It was I wish it got further, but things didn't work out. But I think that's something to really highlight, is that these characters, and the mechanics really support this in all of the editions, when you bring in like mass combat and other things, they can have incredible influence on not just a city, but an entire region very, very quickly. And that changes things for when you're creating your NPCs. You probably want to be fleshing out ones that are of a more substantial power level or substantial status in the region or area. And you can still focus on little people as well. That's totally fine. You can have like a street urchin that befriends one of the Exalts, and have those kind of touchstones as well. But I think the power level is something to just keep in mind with these games.
Part of the kind of springing off of that, part of the ethos around Exalted is also examining like, where does power come from, and kind of deconstructing the idea of power by nobility, because the Exalted can come from anywhere. Anyone could be chosen by one of the gods. So it is very typical to have Exalted heroes from kind of unexpected corners of society. And because they are people before they're Exalted, having those ties to those communities and groups, and pushing back against established power. I mean, you kind of mentioned it in the big introduction to creation. There's been like 4 cycles of the people in charge were doing a bad job, and so they got overthrown. And that is very much something that the game encourages in the way that the setting is presented.
All right, Chazz. So let's set the stage a little bit further. So we've talked about the Solar Exalted, the ones that are empowered by the sun, the chosen of the sun. But what about the Abyssal Exalts that the Kickstarter is about? What can you share about them?
Earlier in the show, you mentioned that as the Solar Exalted were returning to creation, there were also Exalted somewhat like them, twisted by darker powers, and the Abyssals are one of those groups. I guess we'll jump back into some more deep lore for Exalted, because you kind of have to with Abyssals. I guess before we do that, Abyssals are like the goth versions of the Solar hero. They are the goth anti-heroes to that. And that was what in my gothy high school years drew me to the Abyssals in particular. But what has happened is that the Death Lords, these 13 immortal ghost kings, who are the empowered ghosts of long dead Exalted, were able to find the Jade Prison, where the sparks of solar exaltation were locked, and they planned to break it open and steal all of the souls out of it to create their own Exalted champions. But they kind of messed up and only got about half of the souls. So they took those solar exalted souls and inverted them with the power of the underworld to create the abyssal exalted. So instead of the lawgivers and rulers of creation that the solars are meant to be, you have Death's lawgivers, the Death Knights, the Abyssal Exalted, who are champions of the underworld and sworn to destroy creation.
So you've kind of set it up already, but how exactly do they differ from the solar or the dragon blooded?
So,
How do the stories that you tell
sure. So,
differ?
as an Abyssal, a Death Knight, part of that comes with a tie to the Death Lord who offered you exaltation. And for Abyssals, exaltation comes at the moment of death. Someone is faced with impossible odds, and that leads to their death. And the Death Lord shows up and says, "Hey, the world has treated you unfairly. I can offer you power in exchange for promising to serve me and promising to destroy the world." And those who accept that deal get the spark of abyssal exaltation, which pulls them back from that moment of death. So they have died but not fully passed through, and empowers them to survive whatever situation they've found themselves in that led to their death in the first place. And then they are sworn in service to the Death Lords, who are these ancient ghost kings, and the Neverborn, who empowered the Death Lords themselves, who are the dead souls of the Primortals destroyed in the Revolution of the Gods at the beginning of the game Deep Lore. Um, and so that places you in a very different position narratively from the Solar Exalted or the Dragon Blooded. Because the Solar Exalted are returning to a creation where they are alone. They don't have any support network or society. All they have are the other Exalted who they find and band together for survival. The Dragon Blooded are part of this giant empire that rules the center of the world and a lot of the areas around it. And they have their ties to both the empire and their kind of complex noble families. For an abyssal, you are instead a singularly powerful servant of an immortal ghost lord, and that places you in a very different kind of position where the Death Lords are courting your service, keeping you on a loose leash, sending you to pursue their schemes, but also giving you the freedom to pursue the death of creation in your own way. Now, that said, you do not have to be locked into that Death Lord service. We have the idea of a Death Knight errant, an abyssal who has refused to serve their Death Lord and cut themselves off and gone to do their own thing. You also don't have to work to destroy the world, because while they are all sworn to do so, the way they do that is different, especially in 3rd edition. So the play space is not just you are villains trying to destroy the world, but really a chance for you to be anti-heroes, whether that means you are conquering a kingdom for your own rulership and just taking advantage of all that power you bargained for, or if it means you are trying to rebuild the underworld in your own image. That's up for you to decide.
Yeah, I actually read a Exalted novel a couple of summers back, and I do remember it featured several abyssals, and one that really stood out. I don't remember his full title, but he was usually just referred to as Disciple. And he was pretty interesting because he was still in service to the Death Lord, but was doing his best to kind of limit the damage he did. In particular, when dealing with his former lover, who'd been the Solar Exalted that became, or the Solar Exalted soul that became Harmonious Jade. Yeah, we're just hitting you with lots of deep lore here, but I think that was really a very interesting foil to both the Solars and the more mustache twirling Abyssals that were featured in that novel as well. So there's a lot you can do with the Abyssals. I think that's pretty rad. We're probably kind of doing things a little out of order with our questions here, but I'm a little curious, Chazz, about what support and discussion Abyssal Third Edition has to circles of abyssals that come from different different Death Lords.
So there's a couple of ways that we address that. First, there was a real focus on making sure that each of the Death Lords was able to give their abyssals enough room to act freely in a game sense. Some of the Death Lords in the past had like a very myopic focus on like a particular story, and and so it didn't make a lot of sense to serve them because they weren't out and doing things that your characters might care about. So part of the shift of focus is that the Death Lords are very tied into the politics of the underworld. In particular, you mentioned ties to Wraith. There is a Stygia in Exalted as well, which is the eternal city in the center of the underworld. And many of the Death Lords are interested in ruling over Stygia, and all have representatives in the group of ghosts who rule it. And so you can have a game centered in Stygia where all of the Death Lords are going to have agents, and so it makes sense to have abyssals in service to different Death Lords working there. There's also just room for the Death Lords to have various schemes going on that would let your abyssals serve where the Death Lords have made some kind of pact to work together, and you can create a mixed circle that way. So there's, I think, one of the things that is true of Exalted Third Edition is there's not a lot of space in the way the books are written for storyteller sections either. But that is something we'd definitely like to explore more in the companion book to the Kickstarter as we expand the content out there for Abyssals.
So you heard it here first, everybody. Back so that they get extra books.
Yes, please do.
Make Chazz write more.
I would like that.
Awesome. That'd be great. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about this third edition book that's going to be going on Kickstarter soon. So, Chazz, let's talk about the Abyssal Charms. Charms are the kind of core cool powers of Exalted, and I got some commentary on first edition and second edition charms, but I'd like to hear straight up what's going on with the third edition ones for Abyssals.
So yeah, charms are really the core of the power of Exalted from a mechanical sense. For the Abyssals, these charms are very similar to the charms of the Solar Exalted in that they are centered around the 25 abilities in the game. So you'll have charms for melee and for bureaucracy and for survival and for archery and all the others. And so you get a series of magical powers almost, but they're more feats of excellence that the Exalted can channel their magic into to do the awesome super-powered things that they do. For Abyssals, as the dark reflections of the Solars, their charms have also always reflected what the Solar charms do. But for third edition, we wanted to take this in a little bit of a different direction. So they definitely echo that, but as the power level of the charms increases, we've added in the themes of the Death Lords to the charms. So the Death Lords, again, these immortal ghost kings have influenced the essence of their abyssals. And so you might have the Eye and Seven Despairs, who's this Death Lord that is a mad crafter and necromancer. And he inspires craft charms about kind of being a dangerous arms merchant who is selling goods to those who can ill afford to use them. Or there's a whole series of resistance charms inspired by the First and Forsaken Lion, who is trapped in a suit of immortal armor. And these charms are about manifesting armor and summoning chains out of your armor, and eventually like manifesting a fanged casket out of your armor that will bite somebody. So they get weird and ghosty at the higher power levels, which really makes the Abyssal charms in this edition stand out from how they were presented in the past.
Indeed. I don't want to start an edition war or anything, but in previous editions, as Chaz is kind of alluding to, the abyssal charms were kind of just the solar ones with some black eyeliner put on, pretty much. Kind of just an inversion, typically. So it's really great to hear that there's so much experimentation going on and creating these much more unique, ghosty, or just kind of spicy charms here.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the writers who in the charm section gave us really juicy, interesting things. I can give you some examples if you'd like.
Yeah,
I would
that'd be
like
great.
to.
Okay,
Maybe just the top three or something would go awesome.
sure. So one of the ones that I was excited to see was Red-Winged Rhyton Murmuration. This is a thrown weapon charm that animates the spattered blood of the Abyssal's victim into carrion birds that circle the Abyssal and fly out as the Abyssal throws more weapons to attack the Abyssal's foes. So that one's pretty cool. Numinous Shadow Beast is a survival charm that transforms the Abyssal's familiar into a shadowy monstrosity. So if you are a player who likes having a pet, you can turn your pet into a terrible nightmare monster. That one's also pretty fun. And one that I'm going to pat myself on the back for writing here. Coveted Prize Craftwork lets an Abyssal crafter instill obsession and paranoia into an object that she has created. So whoever possesses it becomes obsessed with keeping it safe and paranoid that others are trying to steal it from her.
Ooh, I like that a lot.
That
That's
sounds
a lot
like
of fun. Ooh.
That sounds like a real fun way to just destroy a town.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and usually in Exalted, of course, you can kind of chain charms together. So you could do a lot with that one. That could be pretty fun.
Yeah, and that is actually part of a whole series of craft charms that let you do slightly different things and instill slightly different influences into the things that you are creating. Whether that is a piece of art that inspires an obsession with death, or this one that I talked about being inspiring or creating this paranoia. There's another one that draws other people to try to steal it from you. There's another one where you can put a curse on your craft work. And they're designed so that you can kind of layer them together and create some really nasty things to tear down a kingdom just by making a thing and leaving it there.
Love it. That's awesome.
Another one, I know you said 3, but I'm going to go to 4, is Temple Shattering Ruination Curse, where with an act of might, the Abyssal tears down a structure and then curses the land that it has fallen upon, creating a temporary Shadowland. Shadowlands are rifts between creation and the underworld, which is an extremely dangerous thing, since then ghosts can come out and the armies of the Death Lords could march forth, for example. But a lot of really interesting and unique things that Abyssals can do with their charms across every ability. Like Solar Exalted, Abyssals get to pick one ability where they ignore the prerequisites, like the power stat prerequisites for getting those charms. So if you want these kind of high-powered top-tier charms, you can get them right out at character creation. And we wanted to give juicy charms for every ability to make sure that someone would say, "Ooh, I like that. I'm going to make that my chosen ability just so I can get that charm."
Very nice. So, like I mentioned earlier, I'm a big lore nerd. So I got to ask: does the new book continue the story, the plot line, the meta plot, whatever you want to call it, of Exalted? Are characters like Disciple from the book that Mike read and Mask of Winter expanded upon at all?
I'll say no and yes. And the first part of no is about continuing the story. Part of the meta plot design of Exalted is we have what I call Day Zero meta plot, meaning that there's a whole bunch of history to Exalted, a whole bunch of setting information for how we got to where we are when your game begins. but Exalted doesn't move forward from that point. So there's not an advancing meta plot in that sense. The meta plot is everything that sets up the setting. So it doesn't continue that story, but it definitely expands on it. So we get to see the underworld, and the underworld is very different in Exalted Third Edition than in the past. So we've been saying that's the case since the core book with Third Edition, and this is the book where we get to show that off. We also really expand on what each of the Death Lords is up to. Where do they rule? What are their schemes? Who are their favored servants? And so we expand. If you're looking for, I guess, for villains for any other type of Exalted game, the Death Lords and their servants are a great place to look for that. So it definitely expands on that. In terms of specific characters, all of the Death Lords get a lot of attention. So you mentioned the Mask of Winters in particular. The Mask of Winters is kind of the most visible Death Lord in creation. One of the big events that happened a couple years before the game start is that the Mask of Winters emerges from the underworld and conquers the city, kind of showing the Dragon-Blooded that the Abyssal Exalted exist, that the Death Lords exist, and that they're here to throw down. Now, the way Abyssals in Third Edition changes this is that the Mask of Winter's goal is not the immediate conquest of the entire world, but is to create kind of this conflict where more people are dying and it is sending more souls to his part of the underworld so that he can build up his empire and conquer the entire eastern regions of the underworld. Because he is more interested in doing that than he is in conquering creation at this time. So that's kind of a new context, a new look at what the Mask of Winters is up to. Do either of you have any favorite Death Lords that you want to talk about?
I would like to hear more about the lover clad in the raiment of tears.
Oh, she's a fun one. So we talked about the Mask of Winters wanting to conquer the underworld, which is really not what his job is supposed to be. The Neverborn said, you destroy the world. And many of the Death Lords are not doing that. The lover clad in the raiment of tears is one of the Death Lords who is true in her devotion to the Neverborn's dreams to destroy creation. But she's doing so by slowly breaking the spirits one by one of those who face her trials. She rules this domain up in the north where she is slowly spreading sorrow and despair across creation, making mortals give in to the futility of life. One of the things that we set up among the Death Lords is this division between those who are following their own interests and those who are kind of true to the mission of the Neverborn.
Awesome. How about the First and Forsaken Lion?
The First and Forsaken Lion is kind of interesting when we talk about that serving the Neverborn versus not serving the Neverborn dichotomy. Because the First and Forsaken Lion watched the other Death Lords kind of get away with pursuing their own schemes. And he took the army that he had built up for the conquest of creation and instead turned it against the underworld because he wanted to bring the underworld under his united rule. And the Neverborn stirred in their slumber long enough to smack them down for that, entombing them in soul steel armor and basically dissolving his ghost body into this armor. And they now are stuck in this armor. They can't remove it. In fact, there just are a spirit inhabiting the armor. They built up this giant army. And while they are assiduously following the Neverborn's orders to attack creation, they're doing so in dribs and drabs, very half-heartedly, ordering their generals to pursue these objectives while studying the secrets of the underworld instead of leading their army.
Very cool. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and each of the 9 Death Lords who appear in the book get a pretty extensive write-up. That includes, like I said, their domain, their servants, what their schemes are, And we did really focus on making sure that each of them would be an interesting Death Lord to serve as Death Knight. So this is probably one of the biggest changes from past editions of Abyssals, where in the past the Death Lords had almost supernatural control over you as an Abyssal. In this edition, the Death Lords recognize that each Abyssal is a significant investment and could break the bonds of service if they chose, and so needs to be enticing enough and supportive enough with their Abyssals to be able to convince them to follow those schemes. Because in Exalted, where your player characters, the question is, what are you doing with all of this power? You need a reason for them to serve. Just smacking them with a magic do what I say stick is not as much fun as having this kind of interplay between the Death Lord and their Death Knights to convince them to follow their schemes.
I couldn't agree more. Games where you don't really have a strong motivation beyond, well, that's the game we're playing, are kind of boring in my opinion. So I'm glad that you've gone over that, you've thought of that, you covered it. So thank you.
You also asked about Disciple, and the Disciple does not appear in this book. We didn't have a lot of room to cover individual abyssals in a lot of detail. So each of the Death Lords, I think, has between like 3 and 5 abyssals who get named and talk a little bit about how they serve their Death Lord. The Disciple is not one of them, because as a servant of the Mask of Winters, there are lots of other abyssals vying for those slots. One of the things we're definitely putting in the companion book is more Abyssal Exalted, and one of the premium backer rewards as part of the campaign is to pick a previously named Abyssal to get a full write-up in that book. So if there is one who is your favorite out there from past editions, or who appears in the manuscript in this edition, that you want to get more information about, you have that option. And I know we're excited to put them all in there.
Awesome. That sounds really cool. So, Chazz, we've had a lot of other Exalts come out. We got Solars, we got Lunars, we got Dragon Blooded. What does Exalted Abyssals bring to the table for rules or lore ideas that you can use in Chronicles for other Exalts?
From a rules perspective, the biggest new set of mechanics is around necromancy, which is usable by most types of Exalted. Necromancy in 3rd edition, as in past editions, works very similarly to sorcery. So characters can initiate as a necromancer, and they have an initiation ritual that kind of describes in what way they perform sorcery. And then there are sorceress spells, or rather necromantic spells, and necromantic workings that they can perform. In Exalted, spells are kind of a lot like high-level D&D spells, I guess, where it is one encapsulated power that does one thing, whereas a working is the sorcerer or necromancer's ability to say, I'm a magic guy. I'm going to use my magic to do a thing, and have some mechanical framework over that. And so spells are like something you do as a one-off event. A working is something your character could be working on over the course of months, or even years in the case of the grandest workings, that really can impress and with magic upon the world and reshape things. So you can do that in necromancy as well as in sorcery. Additionally, in this version, many sorcery spells can be reflavored as necromancy spells. So you have a wide range of spells that you can use as a necromancer. You're not just limited to what appears here in Abyssals. So we've been releasing spells all along for Exalted, and this, as a necromancer, you can pick from that spell list. And then we have added a whole bunch of necromancy spells that are either updated from past editions or brand new cool ideas brought in for this book. Some examples: there's Drowning in the Endless Dark, which summons the Sea of Shadows out of the underworld to inundate miles around the necromancer, and those pulled beneath the surface. sink endlessly in the water until drowned, because the flood waters of the Sea of Shadows have no deeps. Um,
Hmm.
and necromancers can summon undead behemoths from the underworld. And we actually have a fully statted behemoth in the antagonist chapter, as well as couple of other suggestions along with a spell for undead horrors that you could summon. There's a lot of cool stuff in necromancy.
So what else do we have that could be a cool mechanic for other exalts in Exalted Abyssals?
So we have a couple of new martial arts. We have an update to Hungry Ghost style, where the martial artist empowers their lower soul to become primally furious and drive their violent fighting style. We also introduce a new sidereal martial arts. Sidereal martial arts are kind of the next level up of enlightened martial arts. Previously, only the sidereal exalted kind of knew these secrets. But the bishop, one of the Death Lords, um, has perfected his own sidereal martial arts style called the Albicant Sepulchre of Extinction style. This style uses staves, scythes, and wide sweeping attacks. And the martial artist manifests slabs of funerary marble and wounds the world, manifesting as blood rain when they kill their enemies. Um, so that's a fun one, totally new for this edition. And we've got, as for most of the big Exalted books, a whole bunch of new artifacts. In this case, they're all Soul Steel artifacts, so they are definitely abyssal flavored. But
Hmm.
in theory, any Exalt type could wield them. A couple of personal favorites are Nyraxes, which is a lantern that was made from a fragment of a failed underworld sun, whose light reveals treachery, and it can absorb souls and then use those souls for various things. And the other one is the Ravenous Throne, which is a battle throne for an abyssal to ride, made from the chains of a ghost called a Rantai, which is kind of it is a ghost that shreds other ghosts and adds links to its chains. And an abyssal took one of them and twisted it into the shape of a chair. So you've got these almost centipede or spider-like chain legs on the bottom of this throne. And it will walk around and attack on its own for you. It's a very cool thing.
Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. That's awesome. I completely forgot about Soul Steel and the other materials that were related to different exalted types. Yeah, the setting's awesome. There's a lot of really cool stuff and great thought that's gone into it over the years.
Speaking of really cool stuff, great segue. Thank you there. The Kickstarter is coming soon, or by the time this posts, it may already be out. Check Kickstarter.
Actually,
Tell us
don't check Kickstarter. This one's going to be on Indiegogo.
the what do we call that? The campaign is coming out any minute now. It might already be out by the time you hear this. Check Indiegogo. Make sure. What can you tell us about stretch goals?
So, like the other Exalted funding campaigns, we are we already have the content written for Abyssals. That's ready to go. As soon as you back, you'll get access to the backer preview content, and by the end of the campaign, the entire text, which is fully playable, will be in your hands. So the stretch goals focus on adding content to a companion book. When What we'll do is we'll have an Abyssals companion book where all of the premium backer rewards and all of the cool stuff that we get to fund with stretch goals. We'll make a second book of Abyssal content. I mentioned that earlier. If you have a particular favorite Abyssal, we have a bunch of other cool premium rewards as well to add. So, like if you want to pick a Death Lord to get a full write up, or if you want to invent a new underworld location and add that to Exalted, we've got those kind of premium backer levels. From a stretch goal perspective, we'll add kind of more of everything that is in Abyssals. We plan to add more to the underworld, more about ghosts, more artifacts, additional abyssal charms, expanded information about necromancy. So if what you're hearing for Abyssals sounds like it's your jam, there's going to be more of all of that in the companion book.
Definitely sounds like my jam. So I look forward to the book and the companion book.
And actually, something else that we're going to have as a stretch goal, the last couple of Exalted campaigns did not have a map, but we are returning to having a map as one of the stretch goals for Abyssals. So there will be a shiny new map of the underworld that comes along with this campaign.
Oh man, I love maps.
Yeah, that's actually very tempting. That's really awesome.
I say that surrounded by my Exalted maps from past campaigns.
Oh, that's awesome. Chazz, I gotta say that your excitement for Exalted is really it's really infectious. I want to just sit down and read through some Exalted books, maybe even pick up a second novel in that series, and just dig into it a bit further. Yeah, it's a great setting. It's a great setting.
Yeah, I have. Like I said, I've been playing Exalted since I think 2003, a couple years after it initially came out, and it has been my favorite game to run since then. It is my favorite game to write for. I love the team that I work with, writing and developing the books. We've kind of have our own little writer community, which is everyone is collaborating to make the books as good as they can be. And it, like, I mean, I am eternally excited about Exalted, but it's been such a big part of my life, and I want to bring the excitement and joy that I get out of it to others.
Awesome. Yeah, let's make this Indiegogo campaign happen. So we're definitely going to put links to that campaign in the show notes so that people can easily access it. I'll probably also edit this episode and make sure that I clarify that it's Indiegogo and not Kickstarter at the beginning of the show, so we make sure we get that information out there as well. Yeah, really, really awesome stuff. Chazz, is there anything else that you want to share? Like, if people want to get in touch with you, is there a good place to message you, or a good way to send you any, just like general questions or anything like that?
Sure. So I am on a lot of Discords. I'm on the Darker Days Discord. I'm on the Onyx Path Discord. I'm on the Exalted Fan Cord, and you can at me in any of those spaces if you have a question for me specifically. Many of the writers and developers say don't do that, but you are welcome to do so. If you do so politely and don't expect an immediate response, I will get to you. I just can't promise to get there immediately. In the shattered wasteland of the social media world, I have found myself over on Blue Sky as @PresidentOfBirds. So I will post about additional projects that I'm doing over there. That's probably the best place to follow me on social media these days. That is probably the best. Those are probably the easiest ways to get to me, is either Discord or Blue Sky.
Yeah, understood. I'm pretty much my social media footprint is basically zero at the moment. It's basically Discord and LinkedIn. I guess you could message me on LinkedIn. I'll get back to you in 9 months.
Yep. I think you mentioned Old Gods of Appalachia earlier, and one of the things they said in their newest season was that we could join them in standing upon the corpse of the thing that was once called Twitter and screaming into the void, which is a pretty great summation of social media these days.
Absolutely. And we are, of course, Darker Days Radio. We do have a bunch of social media. You can go to the linktree/Darker Days Radio to find all the social media. Facebook, Twitter. We're on Blue Sky now. I think there's a Threads, there's Tumblr, and if you message those things, Chris will probably get back to you because I don't have an account anymore. But what a fun episode! Really great, Chazz, to have you here on the show again, because you were we interviewed you at PAX Unplugged
in the before
a number of
times.
years ago. I think in the before times, 4 years ago. Yeah, and that was awesome. Really hope to have you on in the future as well. Your writing has really expanded, since then, and talking about Trinity, Chronicles of Darkness, all that kind of good stuff could be pretty cool in the future as well. And of course, anything for Exalted, I think we'd be pretty happy to talk about too.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back and talk Exalted like anytime.
Awesome. And I think that's it for this show. And to all the listeners out there, take it easy and have a good night.
Stay safe out there, everyone.
This has been an episode of Darker Days Radio. Special thanks to Occam's Laser for the intro, outro, and new bumper music from their hit album, 9 Circles. Check out the rest of their work at occamslaser.bandcamp.com.